Like, ride with me if you ride with me, you can slide with me if you feel like.
What is up, nerds? What is up? It's me, your buddy pal, HeyArcher. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You're here for episode 152. 152 of the HeyArcher podcast. It's been a long time. I shouldn't have left you. I forgot the rest of the lyrics of the song. It's been a while. I am back fresh. This is a very Brendan Schaub thing to say. I am back fresh off the plane, but not from the plane. I drove to Washington, D.C. It was a short vacation with a lady friend. Went down there to see some of her friends that I've never met, but I've only heard of. And it was quite a good time. It's also weird traveling again because, you know, her and I and our families are now fully vaccinated. And it was almost like, last year was just a wash. Like last year, it feels like didn't really happen. And it's just weird to like be on the road and be at truck stops or rest stops and go to like a restaurant and sit inside, but not like your local one that you go to that you feel safe in, like not in your bubble, but like somewhere completely different. It was just a really wild experience. It was almost like being in a movie, except people were not unmasked. Like that's the one part about movies now that when you watch them, I don't know about you. I mean, I know for myself, I'll watch a movie and I'm like, why aren't they wearing their mask? Like if it's a recent movie, and it's not because I'm like, oh, you should be wearing a mask to film a movie. It just seems weird to see people in public talking to each other, having dinner, doing whatnot. No protection whatsoever on their face. As far as everything else, I mean, that's a whole different story. But that brings us to the reason why we had to film this episode, record this episode, however you're watching it. So, as a reminder, HeyArcher.com is your home for everything HeyArcher, whether it's the audio podcast, the video podcast, the unboxings, the photography, all that stuff. You can also go down there if you want to just support the brand, support the movement. There's a donation button at the very bottom where you can choose to donate on my website or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HeyArcher. A lot of stuff happened in the last, it feels like, I guess it was a week really, but to me it feels like 2 weeks if I'm counting forward in time actually. And that is because there's a UFC event coming up this weekend. I think there's actually 2 UFC events coming up this weekend. I don't know why in my brain that's what's happening, but I feel like there's actually 2. But we have UFC 261. That's on Saturday. And on that card, that's why I thought there was another one. So on that card, you have, as a reminder for all you UFC fans, we have Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal, Weili Zhang versus Rose Namajunas, Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade, and then Uriah Hall versus Chris Weidman. For some reason, I thought that fight was a different card. I didn't think it was all together on one thing. So you have that happening this weekend. And the reason that's in conversation is last week there was also a UFC card, and that card actually was a pretty decent one. By the way, in case you don't know, there's going to be timestamps down below. If you want to skip the UFC stuff and go into everything else, feel free. If not, hang out for a while. You'll see where the pop culture stuff starts to tie in here. Anyway, last week we had Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum and Andrei Arlovski versus Chase Sherman. So two UFC cards that if we were, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even that long, maybe 3 years ago, would have been a really big deal. Like both just loaded with talent at the top. I mean, that's kind of the story now. The UFC is you'll have a lot of top loaded cards, but especially the one coming up this Saturday, you actually have 3 title fights on one card, which is insane. And for some odd reason, it's not something that we really care about. We have this past weekend, former UFC middleweight champion fighting a middleweight and welterweight contender, and yet that's overshadowed. And then this weekend coming up, 3 title fights happening with 6 amazing athletes, and yet that is overshadowed by the singular entity that is the Paul family. In this case, Jake Paul. Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Now, what's funny here is I've been listening to a lot of DJ Academics on. I guess I'm watching him on YouTube, but it's like a restream of his Twitch show. I'm not sure if he actually streams exclusively on YouTube at any point in time, but I've been watching some of the restreams of him and a couple other YouTubers. And there's some other things I'm going to talk about today, of course, but the Jake Paul versus Ben Askren fight was like, I wouldn't say Floyd Mayweather level, but it was very high as far as pop culture goes in people talking about a fight coming up. In this case, it was a boxing match, not a mixed martial arts match. However, you had a former, what was supposed to be contender, Ben Askren, crossing into the boxing realm. And it was interesting. It was interesting to say the least. Now you could go across the internet and see all the memes and see everybody talking about it and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, you know the outcome by now. You know how it happened. You probably watched the stream live on a number of pirate sites, on Instagram, on Twitter. You've seen it all, right? There's nothing to talk about as far as how the fight went. I will say I don't think it was rigged, but as far as like any details, and it's all irrelevant to me. What is important, I feel, when it comes to all of this is the realm of content creators being in control of the content, right? Within reason, within limits, but for the most part in control. And you'll see again where that ties in later. But what you saw on Saturday was somebody who created a brand for himself say, okay, I'm going to cross into a realm. This was years ago now. Cross into a realm of things I'm not a professional at that. Like, I'm not a professional boxer. But screw it. I'm going to put on a boxing match or boxing show, whatever you want to call it, and see what happens. And the paycheck off that was pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. And you fast forward to this past weekend, and you have that guy, Jake Paul, and he's partnered with all these other people, right? Partnered with Snoop Dogg, partnered with Justin Bieber, Oscar De La Hoya, right? To have a brand that there's other celebrities and athletes in there, but to have this brand where they are the ones running the show. They are the ones calling the shot. And got you to buy in to 2 non-professional boxers box in a ring, a la celebrity boxing. But yet somehow it still felt different because there was a paywall there. And you also had the same person who's been in other matches, who's won and lost, but you've had Jake Paul in other matches. But now you had him crossing this line of he's fighting a professional fighter. And it was so cool to see because you had all these people who knew nothing of Ben Askren just say he's a bum. He looks like a bum. On the broadcast, they were calling him a bum, but he still had professional in the title. And it got people to buy in to say almost what if, right? What if? And of course, you have at this point in time, all of these people now who are like, you know, Tyron Woodley's coming out of nowhere, BJ Penn's coming out of nowhere, and they're all talking about, I'm gonna box Jake Paul next, right? Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz. Like now Jake Paul, he's writing his own check. He's at the point now where he's somehow got professional fighters to say, I want to fight him, not just because he's a great athlete or a great fighter, but because he's owning the content, because the people involved are owning the content. They're cutting a much larger check than they normally would. I mean, Ben Askren made more in this fight than he probably made in 2 UFC fights combined. I'm guessing, right? The numbers are online. But it was a, you know what? Let's just look it up real quick. How much did Ben Askren make? First thing that pops up on Google when I type it in here. And it said his base pay was 500,000, right? That's what wait. Askren said he made more than that, but didn't say how much. And that was 360,000 total that he made in all of his Bellator fights. So if this is correct in even the slightest amount, his base pay was $500,000 to go in there and get punched out in a minute and a half. And you have all these UFC fighters, right? All these retired fighters who are just sitting around. They're just like, how? How did you do that? I'm going to do that next. I want to do that now. And it's because they don't own the content. It's because they don't own themselves. They don't own their rights. If you didn't know this about the UFC fighters, and I learned this way back when you had John Fitch, right? John Fitch, way back when. Now John Fitch has gone full on heel turn. Like he's all conspiracy theory and all sorts of stuff, right? He's gone. But I learned something from John Fitch. At this point, maybe it was like 8 years ago. Let's see. When was John Fitch's last fight? John Fitch record. Because he's fought since he left the UFC. But the last time that he fought in the UFC, let's see here, was World Series of Fighting, UFC 153 in 2012. John Fitch has been out of the UFC for almost 10 years at this point. That's insane. He actually won that fight too. But what I learned from John Fitch way back then is he wasn't in the UFC video game, whichever video game number that was at that point. And it was because he wasn't going to get paid to be in the video game, right? When all these fighters sign the contracts and they sign, on the dotted line, I commit, and that's the crazy part, I commit to 5 fights. I commit to 10 fights. They also sign away their likeness and rights to the UFC. UFC owns all that stuff. It's absolutely insane. And all these fighters are looking at a Ben Askren who came into UFC, won a single fight, barely won that fight against Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler, if you haven't seen that fight, was brought in there to murder John Askren. Robbie Lawler, the ruthless one, was brought into that fight with the sole purpose of assassinating Ben Askren. Somebody Dana White has hated forever. But he won't. But he won. He somehow won. And then the lose streak happened, and then Ben Askren's like, I'm good. I'm all set. And he's the one that's getting $500,000 to fight against Jake Paul. And all these fighters are now like putting their hands up. Like, I want to do it. And just so you know, they're also doing it because they can't go just fight somewhere else, right? Their rights, their likeness, all that stuff in the realm of mixed martial arts, in the realm of grappling, it belongs to the UFC, right? The boxing is where there's maybe some play. I don't know how. That's where somebody with some real legal knowledge would probably be able to tell you. But they're getting a pass somehow on some of these boxing things. And I feel like it's also involved with whatever their contract has. Maybe they tell the UFC, all right, if I'm going to go into boxing, I'm not coming back to the UFC. Maybe that's it. But a lot of these people are just not getting paid because when they go to the UFC, it's like, all right, I belong to you. I will prove my value over time, but do what you will with me as a property. And the gamble rarely works in their favor, if at all. And it's quite sad. But at the same time, if this isn't the pathway, if this isn't the red carpet to say this is how you should do it, I don't know what is. And unfortunately, it may take somebody like a Conor McGregor. It's going to take a big name like a John Jones. If they could somehow get out of their contracts and start a league. But here's the kicker, because this has been done before. I don't want you to think that this has never been done before. People have gone ahead and said, I'm going to start a league, World Series of Fighting, start a league and just give it my all, right? You've got to get some people in there with drawing power, and they don't have to be fighters. You just got to get people in there with some drawing power and keep it simple, stupid. Simple, stupid. John Jones makes his dream match with Fedor Emelianenko, right? It says, Fedor, we're gonna cash in on all of this. And the undercard is freaking Bad Bunny doing a wrestling match against Chris Jericho. Whatever. But they say, hey, we're all going to divvy up all these, amounts, X ways and whatever, But a lot of these people now, especially with the power of the internet, you have the power to promote yourself. You have the power to control the narrative. And you have the power to sometimes cut yourself a check. It's crazy. It's insane. And there's different ways they can do it. I have never run a successful promotion, so I couldn't tell you. But I feel like when you run a promotion, depending on how you're going to do it, you don't have to put on regular shows. The reason UFC puts on so many shows is because they sign deals to larger networks, which in turn say, you owe us X amount of shows. That's why this happens. That's why there's a UFC fight every week, and they're demanding $50 or what is it now, $70 or something like that, every week from you to watch. That's the only reason. It's not because they like putting on that many fights. It's because they owe somebody else that many fights. I don't understand it. I don't know why they continue to do it, but they do. And what's even crazier than that is, as a UFC fan, with the crazy card coming up, I could care less. Dana White has treated those fighters so poorly that I'd rather not even give him a cent, but just watch the results later on. Especially because a lot of these fighters at this point, they're in there because they need to be in there. And it's sad. It's like watching, for some of these people, it's like watching a building burn, and there's people in there and you can't do anything about it. And it's just happening. It is happening, and it's awful. It's absolutely awful. And I can't watch it. I can no longer in good conscience sit down and say, Dana White, here's $70. Let me watch your product. And this is a broken record at this point. If you've been a fan of HeyArcher, the show, for a long time, then you've heard me say that quite a bit. But this weekend, 3 title fights with 6 amazing fighters, and another chance to watch Chris Weidman get smoked in the ring. Or the cage, sorry. I can't do it. I just cannot do it. So I want you to tell me. Hit me up on HeyArcher on Instagram or Twitter, Nerd Affiliated on Instagram, anywhere, comment section here, and tell me if you are in on the fight this Saturday. Especially because, I could be crazy here as well. We have the main event, which is Kamaru Usman. Let's see, where is Jorge? Which apparently now everybody likes Jorge again, despite all the political stuff that happened. Let's see here. Jorge Masvidal, Wikipedia, scrolling down. So this is a rematch, FYI. So he lost the decision to Usman last July, right? Another controversial moment, because this was all happening amongst the COVID popping off, but he lost that 5-round decision. I'm not sure why he gets a second shot right away. That it is what it is, but no care. I have zero care to watch this card, and part of it is it's almost like fighter abuse. To me, it's pure fighter abuse. You got Rose talking crazy over there about rather die than bleed red or something like that towards Zhang. Like it's almost like enough is enough when it comes to the UFC. Like I'm just like, to quote Eugene S. Robinson, I think the only thing that would get me back into UFC is John Jones versus Francis Ngannou. And even that won't happen because Dana White will not pay the bill for that. He'll pay them some money, but I guarantee you Ben Askren probably made more money than those guys are going to make with far less work. Pretty sure. I know there's championship clause and all that stuff, but all right, let's say, for example, let's think hypothetically here. Francis went from nobody to somebody in a couple of years, right? Let's say Francis goes into that fight, and I predict he loses to John Jones. Just me. If Francis goes into that fight against John Jones, loses the belt, let's say he's a champion, let's say he signed a new deal, right? How much, I'm Googling it right now in case you're not watching, how much did Francis Ngannou make at 260? He made $730,000. $730,000. Ben Askren, $500,000. Francis, $730,000. I know it's $200,000 or $230,000 more. I know that number's there, but when you're at that level and you're looking at the numbers, you're just kind of like, all right, I can't get my own sponsors. I have to cut the UFC a check. I've got to pay all these extra taxes depending on where we fight. And that dude he made almost what I did, right? $200 difference. But if I'm not cutting the UFC a check and I'm getting some of the gate, which is a crazy concept, Ben's making almost what I made. And I'm the UFC heavyweight champion. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And if Dana White makes that fight happen, maybe I care again. But at the moment, right? Nick Diaz coming back, Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 3. I'm good. I'm absolutely, positively all set. Don't even need it. I don't even need that fight. But that's where you let me know. You let me know down below if you're excited for that fight. You let me know in the comment section if you're down for that fight. Who do you think actually would win? Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. I'm curious. I am curious. Something that all of that rolls into, and I mentioned academics before, is the idea of the content creation, the idea of the ownership. And there's two parts to this segment here, right? There's two stories that exist at the moment. Joe Budden, if you don't know, right? Former rapper, retired rapper, who had a podcast that was started up with him, this other guy, Rory, and I think there was a girl on the first episode. It's been a long time since I looked it up, but there's three people, and they started like a Let's Name This Podcast, I think is what it was called, or something along those lines. And the Joe Budden podcast took off over the years. It's been on for a long time. It became that kind of like weekly show, sometimes I think bi-weekly, of just hip hop news and culture. In other words, they just gossiped a lot of gossip. But it was a podcast started with him and his friends, and they kept rolling. And then eventually, this other guy, Mal shows up, and it's the three of them now. Every week, every episode, doing the Joe Budden podcast. Now, Joe Budden eventually jumps on Complex, who does sneaker shopping and a couple other things. And he's on the show with academics. Now I'm drawing a blank on the name of the show. Everyday Struggle. That's what it's called. Everyday Struggle. So he's on Everyday Struggle with academics. Same time he's doing his Joe Budden podcast, right? Eventually gets renamed the Joe Budden podcast. Fast forward that he leaves Complex, he leaves Everyday Struggle, and continues on doing the Joe Budden podcast, and then makes, to me, history. Joe Budden gets signed by Spotify to be the exclusive host of the Joe Budden podcast. And if you want to listen to new episodes, you got to go there. And then the show, like a week or 2 weeks later, would end up on YouTube. But Spotify had first dibs on every new episode. Open the doors. Open the doors to people like Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan's the most popular podcaster in the world, but yeah, he was not the first one into Spotify. That was actually Joe Budden, which I'd actually love for the two of them to be on a show together, as far as an interview, one interview together or something. Then you have Joe Budden say to Spotify, whatever year, 2 years later, I'm out. He's like, I'm out. And then he goes back to kind of doing pure YouTube, and he wants to have like the Joe Budden Network or whatever, that there's all sorts of shows under the Joe Budden banner, right? Why am I telling you this? Remember I said before, there's two sides, or just two topics within this one topic, right? The first one, in relation to the UFC part, to the fighters, owning your brand, owning your content. Spotify, being an umbrella company, still wants control over what is being put on their platform. Just like YouTube, just like Google these days, there's things you can and can't say, right? That we all know that to be true. I do have that rule, though, that if you want to have a podcast, make sure your podcast is safe for work, because you don't want to be called into HR and you're like, hey, was this you saying this on your podcast? But either way, things you can and cannot do, say you cannot say, blah, blah, blah. So Joe Budden decides Spotify's not paying him enough. I'm out of here. I'm done. Joe Rogan's still over there. And I made a video years ago when Joe Rogan got on there, even shouting out Joe Budden for opening the door for Joe Rogan. Now Joe Rogan is getting hit with the censorship, right? Spotify is pulling down Joe Rogan episodes because people in the company are like, I don't agree with what he's talking about. I don't like what he's saying, doing all those kinds of things. I predict here on HeyArcher episode 152 that Joe Rogan will be out of Spotify when the contract's done. I don't know how long the contract's for. Let's look that up now too as well, just to see. Joe Rogan contract, Spotify. Joe Rogan license deal worth $100 million. And that's, of course, hearsay. But let's see, when does the contract end? Let's see, multi-year with Spotify. And as far as when that will end, Spotify deal with him is over 10 years. Oh, okay. No, I was just saying that it's been around for 10 years. All right. But when will this actually end? They're making me scroll. I hate when these websites tell you they have information for you and then they don't give you the information. Length. There we go. Contract length. It just says multi-year. So nobody has like an exact year amount. But I don't think he renews with them at all. At all. Because now this is against everything Joe Rogan said he was about, right? Joe Rogan originally said, he wanted to have people on the show to talk about whatever and almost give their side of the story, give their side of the take. And he has a lot of controversial guests on that show. But Spotify has their own thoughts as to what should be on their platform, what they want tied to them, and have been removing episodes. So now it's more like it's a Joe Rogan show, but it's really the Spotify show featuring Joe Rogan, to me. And the only way to get Joe Rogan content outside of Spotify is the Joe Rogan clips on YouTube, which he said was part of the deal. He could take segments of the podcast, put it on YouTube, put it in the clips YouTube account, and hopefully that draws people back to Spotify. Too much legwork to me. Too much legwork to me. I know he's making a lot of money doing it, but I think at a certain point, Joe may say, I'd rather have full control over my content, do what I want, release it when I want to, library it where I want it to be libraried, if that's even the proper word, and just do his own thing. I think Joe Rogan will be out of Spotify. Just saying it. But as far as Joe Budden goes, again, Joe Budden's kind of setting that pathway. Joe Budden is telling people, listen, you need to be in control of all of it, right? If somebody's going to host you, you need to say, okay, show me how much I am making for you, and then you pay me accordingly. Sounds like a contradiction, of course, because of YouTube, right? Nobody gets all the money they deserve from YouTube. YouTube makes all the money on your content because they're getting the revenue dollars from advertisements, and then they cut you a check, right? But you can still host it somewhere else. Like, you can still have your content anywhere else that you want to, but YouTube is where everybody goes. So you might as well be on their platform. And then if anything, pull people to Patreon, pull them to paywalls, and, you know, do whatever. But that's where Joe Budden was like, contracts like the one with Spotify, they're a trap, right? It's a trap. And they get you in there and then they lock you in. So I think, and I'm predicting, Joe Rogan leaves Spotify either when the deal ends or he breaks it early because it's getting kind of ridiculous. I don't know all the details. It's just what I'm saying. Now, going back to Joe Budden, right? He leaves Spotify, does his own thing, and then the controversy happens. And you have Joe Budden, I guess, breaking up with Rory and Mal. Two people who have been with him on the show for a very long time. Rory since episode 1. And the internet explodes. The internet goes crazy in that world. Not the whole internet, but in the hip-hop world about what is happening on the Joe Budden podcast. And this goes back to something I said a long time ago. And I still hold true to it to this day. To this day. When you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to start a show. I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start a stream. I'm going to start whatever it may be, right? Personally, and this may be because I'm an only child, it may be because this is how I've just done my YouTube channel this whole time, or the podcast this whole time. When you want to go down that road, I truly think it should be a solo road and collaborative things happen to the side, right? Maybe they're their own project. Maybe they're partnered in some other aspect, whatever. But the reason I would say that is because you never want to be tied down to if I want to record and the other person can't record, or the other person has X equipment and I need to go to their house to do it, all of that kind of stuff. To me, that's always, it's a friction point that I feel you shouldn't have. Personal opinion. But then there's the worst case scenario, right? Then there's the scenario where, let's say the show pops off. You have the Joe Budden podcast. Joe Budden's name. But yet the other people are part of the show, right? Do they not own part of the show? Are they not deserving of a third, right? There's 3 of them. I don't know. You tell me. Personally, if I was them, after a while, I'd be like, hey, we're starting to pick up some steam here. Maybe it's Joe Budden and friends. Maybe it's the Joe Mal and Rory show. Like, what place do we hold in your show as a podcast? Is it our podcast? Is it your podcast? Is your podcast featuring us? Should we start our own podcast? Will you help us start our own podcast because we helped you start yours? These are conversations you need to have, especially if something starts to pick off, especially if your name is not on it, especially if you're not the ones getting all the benefits. You can't. That's where it has to stop. And this is a prime example of the show is going to go on. And right now, it's been about a month since they left the Joe Budden show. People don't really care anymore. It's too long. And the ironic part is the show is based on gossip, right? All they do is talk gossip about this person and that person and all sorts of stuff, right? Love and hip hop type stuff. And they won't talk about this. The 3 of them are bound by silence to not talk about it. But what everybody is pointing to is money. Everybody's pointing to the fact that it's a Joe Budden show. Those dudes wanted a raise. They wanted more money. Joe said, no, it's my show. It's what it is, right? If up to this point, there was no discussion like, hey, at X time, since we've been on this show, we want to be part of the show. If those discussions never happened, he doesn't owe you anything. It sucks. It truly sucks. It's a nice guy thing to do, nice person thing to do, nice girl thing to do, to say, hey, you've been with me since day one. You're part of this. We're a team. You get X amount of dollars. But they don't owe it to you, especially when the name's on there. Joe Budden show. Nothing else there. I think they're screwed. I think Rory and Mal are absolutely screwed. I know that academics is going hard on them. I know other YouTubers some are on their side, some are not on their side. Some would say to kind of come up with your own thoughts towards it. But truthfully, I don't see a scenario where they win. And I feel like in a lot of cases when people want to do this kind of thing, you know, there aren't a lot of scenarios where you win unless you agree this is a 50-50, you know, third, 25. Like those have to be ironed out from the start. And if you are that paranoid about it and you're like, hey, I feel like that person's really picking up some steam, I feel like I'm getting kind of screwed here or whatever, that's on you to say, okay, what's the contingency plan here? I think back to Pump Chasers. If any of you are fans of the fitness YouTube stuff, I used to be really into that. You had Physiques of Greatness. It was Chris Jones and Vince G, and they did videos on fitness, right? Channel popped off, started making money. Eventually, Vince G was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But Chris Jones was like, well, we're a team. Vince G's like, eh. Chris Jones still kept cutting Vince a check even after Vince stopped doing the videos because he's like, we agree this was ours. Eventually, Chris Jones says, I'm just going to start my own brand. Out. So it's a weird thing, right? The friends and business and all that kind of stuff. It's always a weird topic. It's a touchy topic, but when it comes to Joe Budden and Rory and Mal, to me, that was all them. You know, they like to bash other people about business moves and blah blah blah. To me, that's all on them. I kind of don't have any sympathy towards them when it comes to this. And if you fall into that trap, watch me jinx myself 10 years down the road here. But if you fall into that trap where you're on a show, it's somebody else's show, you just assume you're going to get pulled along, but it's really their show. It's a trap. It is a trap. And a lot of you, I feel, that listen to my show, content creators, and you guys are doing your own thing and get your side hustles and you got all that stuff. But always make sure you look out for number one and make sure you have a plan. If you don't have either of those, you're setting yourself up. But hey, what do I know? I'm not even at 1,000 subscribers yet. But I love doing it. Anyway, it's been an episode. I miss doing these conversations. I just struggle to find time to do it. But I think once a month is a good cadence for the HeyArcher show, or even just the Rambling show. We'll do one or the other once a month to be here with you on your favorite podcast or YouTube platform. Your choice, not mine. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. HeyArcher Live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Make sure you subscribe down below and hit the bell to get notified. Also, head over to Nerd Affiliated on YouTube. That is where the vlog series is. I was drawing a blank for a second. It's called a vlog. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to all you nerds in the next video. Peace.